Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Our next speaker is Kristen Geez. She's the creator of Advising Generation Z, whose goal is to support, equip, and empower young people ages 10 to 27 to become the best versions of themselves. She's an author and a TEDx speaker. In fact, I saw her TED Talk and it was compelling. That's what made me want to call her to say, please be a speaker for our event. She is going to begin pursuing her doctoral degree in leadership, and get this, she's a former bully. The first question that I asked Kristen was, tell us about a time when you didn't speak up but wish that you had. Here's Kristen.
It would be my last job working in corporate America. I was the youngest person on my team. I worked on the leadership team, hypothetically, which is funny. It was in an HR team that was all about teaching leaders how to be better managers. And I had the worst manager. And I just remember a lot of times that this manager, and I call him RIT, reason I quit. But I remember just thinking to myself that, every day when I would come to work and I would do something, he always found an issue. There was always something that I did that just wasn't up to his standard. Now, in my role, I actually worked with a lot of leaders. So even though he was my direct boss, I helped all of the leaders in the organization. So the only person that ever had an issue was him. So it was very evident to me that, I'm not going to get past this person. And I remember one event in particular, he actually came and whispered in my ear at my cube, where we're in an open office space, and told me that he's tired of me wearing heels to work because I'm taller than him. And for some reason, when I have this height on, I have this air about myself that I'm better than him, or that I get other leaders to like me more than they like him.
Oh my God.
And I remember thinking at that time, I was in my 20s, early 20s. And I remember thinking, who's going to speak up for me? All of these people who are older than me saw this. And I was a millennial. And so everyone on my team was probably baby boomer and up, and he was a baby boomer. So in my mind, I'm like, there's so many generations that should be speaking up for me. And I wanted to cry and I didn't. And I immediately turned around to him and I said, I am not in competition with you. You are my boss. And he just kind of walked away. And I remember after that, I could go in a meeting that didn't have anything to do with him. He would pop up at the meeting and say, oh, just making sure you're here, in front of everyone. It was kind of like he had turned into like this evil stepfather or something. And I remember going to chair, speaking to the women that were in that organization, asking them, what should I do in this situation? Like, you saw that it was wrong, right? And them validating what they saw, but waiting for them to be the person that was going to speak up for me in that moment and say, no, enough is enough. And it took me maybe a month or so before I finally got the confidence to tell my mentor and to tell my mother what was going on, and both of them being livid. And my mentor turning to me as I'm telling her this story, and she said, Kristen, all the time that I've known you, this is the first time that you have ever told me a story where you were playing victim. I don't know who this version of you is, because the Kristen that I know would have never put up with this for 6 months in silence.
Wow.
So you need to do some rethinking to yourself. And I walked away from that situation, going into my car, and I wrote my name down in a journal, because I had to really think, who is Kristen? Like, what version of Kristen has she seen? Because here I am thinking still as a child, and I'm in an adult role. So it was kind of that switch of realizing, like, no, I'm not a pre-adult, I'm in adulthood, meaning I need to address this situation like an adult would be. And I wrote my name down, and I came up with each letter of my name and defined what I wanted to become when I think about Kristen. And it gave me the confidence that I needed to actually go in and speak to 2 bosses ahead of him and let them know what had happened and make a full report. But that was my first time ever having to make a claim through HR, and especially me being in HR. It was just a scary time. So even though I did end up using my voice, I did wait 6 months in silence of this unexcusable behavior, because I was waiting on someone older to come in and rescue me.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, how did it feel to walk in that room and speak up for yourself? Tell us about that moment.
So when I walked in the room and finally, it was my time in court, as we say, I remember I wasn't afraid anymore, because at this point, in true millennial form, I had already started looking for other jobs. So I wasn't too afraid, but I thought that I was going to get the results. And I think this is the part of reality and the part of Disney that's not fair. Because in Disney movies, the bad person ultimately ends up being the one in the wrong. And I remember walking into that room, telling my truth, giving examples, having witnesses, because it wasn't like he did these things in private, having emails where he would send me emails at 3 o'clock in the morning, just always on, even when I would be off work on vacation, always sending me messages, just needing to bother me. And I remember communicating this well. And I remember thinking to myself that, one, I'm the youngest person on this team. I'm one of the few minorities that they have on this team. And I'm a woman working with mostly men. So I needed to go in and articulate myself very well, first of all. And I secondly needed to remember that I wasn't going to let them walk away from the situation thinking that I was too young and that I needed more experience. I knew exactly what the way that I was being treated, and I was being treated wrong. So I felt powerful, but I will be honest, the result that I wanted was that he would no longer be my manager. And unfortunately, they did not want to do that because he was adamant that he stayed my manager. And, it was the craziest thing. They did a whole org switch and still kept me where now I was his only employee. It just made no sense. So I did experience retaliation, but I think in the moment, the fact that I knew that I held my ground and that I knew that I wasn't just representing me, I was representing any young girl that comes after me, and especially any African American that comes and feels afraid to use their voice.
Wow. Yeah. What advice would you give if you could think of one piece of advice for someone, right, that you just described? What would you offer?
I think the biggest advice that I would give to someone is really defining who you want to be to the world. And I think sometimes people say that and it sounds so cliche, and you're like, well, I didn't get to choose my name. My parents chose my name. So what does that even mean to define who I am? But I think for me, when I sat in that car and I wrote down my name and I started Googling what Kristen stood for, and I read some of, the adjectives that described me, and then I decided to really go through and each letter of my name, come up with knowledgeable, come up with resilient, come up with inspiring for each letter, and defining what each one of those letters was, it was easier for me to navigate the way that I would walk into new situations. Because when I quit that job, I decided to full on become an entrepreneur, and I wouldn't have had the confidence that I needed, the discipline that I needed, if I hadn't remembered who Kristen was. I wasn't doing it for validation of anyone else. I wasn't doing it for approval or even for income. I was doing what I felt like I needed to be doing by what I wrote out for who I wanted to be and who I wanted to be known for. And since I made that decision, every step that I have made on my journey as far as being a public figure and being one of the leading voices for millennials has definitely shown the fruit of that labor in that moment when I was in my car thinking about who Kristen was.
Wow. Did you ever think when you were in grade school or even high school that you would be where you're at now?
So I asked my family this question often. When I was younger, my mom had a client and her client made stuffed animals. And so in my room, so I would get stuffed animals like every month, right? And so in my room, I would have my bed in the center and I would have stuffed animals lined up in 3 rows around my bed. And I would stand on my bed and I would give them lessons of the day. So this is something true. I was the only child and I was the only girl of my age group of my cousins. And so when they would come over, I would force everyone to sit down at my easy bake oven at my tea table, and we would have tea, and the guys would just be so over it, but they knew they couldn't go anywhere unless they listened to me first. So when I think of today, how many meetings I sit at where I'm at the head of those tables, when I think about speaking in front of people and I can do it with ease, it's like, oh, I guess I kind of naturally had these skills as a child. Who would have known? Thank you, stuffed animals, for giving me the confidence that I needed. You're so much more friendlier. But I will say, when I speak into a group of people and I see the smiles or the cries or their emotions, I never would have thought that I would have gotten those reactions because I practiced on stuffed animals.
I love it. So you've got a really powerful story. Can you speak to the fact that you used to be a bully and where that has taken you now?
One of the things that I will say, being a bully, I was definitely at that stage where I was crying for my father's attention, who lived in South Africa. Well, he moved after him and my mother divorced to South Africa. And I knew that if I wanted to get his attention, I didn't know where South Africa was. So let me be transparent on that. But I knew that it was far away. And I thought if I got in enough trouble that made the news or, got something big, that he would come back for me, right? And so when I think about how I transitioned out of being a bully into where I am now, I'm very, very cautious of the words that I use with someone when we're getting in a disagreement. I really try to hold on to thinking about what it is that I'm going to say, because I remember how powerful my words used to be when I was a bully and how much it affected people. And so even when I'm working with my students today, I mostly work in advising Generation Z with students that are getting in trouble. And I try to be very cognizant on how I discipline them, because I know that my words will stick around longer than anything else that I ever give them. So sometimes that is to my default, right? That's also why I hesitated for 6 months before speaking out about my boss, because I really try to wait, like, is what I'm saying valuable? Is what I'm saying, is it going to be, if I separated my emotions from the facts? And if I can't separate my emotions from the facts, I might sit on it for way too long. And sometimes as a leader, your people need you to react right away and give them a response. And so that is sometimes a weakness, but also a strength. And so I have to navigate through both of those pretty often.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And in your TEDx talk, you had this great story about when you approached someone. I can't remember exactly who it was, but that was the pivotal moment for me in the TED Talk, when you said that because you used to be a bully. Can you tell us that story?
Yes. So it was my first school district in court, and it was Jose Villasenor, who actually sits on my board now, which is funny because he told me that day. So I had done being a bully, had started a mentoring program in my head, and I wanted to now take it out of my head and actually execute it in a school district and with a court system. And when I presented this idea to a group of administrators, they were kind of thinking, we don't want to spend money on students that get in trouble. That's unheard of. We usually spend money on students that are making straight A's or that are really active. Why are we going to spend money on the students that are constantly causing problems? And as I gave this conversation of telling them about my life and telling them about how I used to be a bully, and it took Dr. Parker, who was my high school principal, giving me an opportunity to see myself as a leader, it made me realize all of these skills that I've been using for bad really could be utilized for good, and that they actually are skills. Being able to persuade a student body to do one thing or the other is a skill. And so as I was talking to them about that, I remember telling him at the end of my speech that I know that you investing in me, investing in your students that are getting in trouble is going to work, because that investment is the reason why I'm standing here today. Very powerful moment. And I remember at the end of that, when they're like, okay, green light, you can go do whatever you want. We're not going to have any teacher object about you taking the kids that get in trouble out of class. Go do that. And I remember Jose said to me one day, I'm going to work for you. And now that he does, I joke on him all the time whenever he's like, oh, you millennials. I was like, yeah, me, I'm the millennial. I'm the millennial. So he's my favorite, one of my favorite baby boomers. But yes, that story.
Oh, I love that. Tell us about a time when you made a mistake or you failed at something as a business person and how you recovered.
So I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. When I got that green light to go and actually teach my program at schools, I hired people that had also made mistakes as I had, and yet they were still in that transitioning, living a double life stage. So they hadn't fully committed to living to their full potential. They had the idea of wanting to do it, and I could inspire them to want to do it, but when they were out of my presence, they were back resulting to the things that they had done bad. And so when I say things that are done bad, I mean, maybe somebody who had always been suspended for fighting, or someone who, used to have an addiction, or someone who has been abused as a child. I mean, really, I wanted troubling stories, because the students that we were serving were in those moments. And I didn't want to get them mentors who were polished and perfect and had never made any mistakes, because that's not the target audience that I had. And so the mistake that I made was that I would literally go to games. I would go anywhere. I could be in a grocery store, and if you look like you were someone with a story, I would be like, oh my God, come work for me. This is going to be so fun. You have a story. Can you pass the background check? Okay, they passed. We're going to go. And then that was it. And I never took the time to think about the impact that it would make on my students if they saw this mentor come into their campus or come into a courtroom and say, I want to mentor you. And then you follow that person on social media, and the version of them that you see in person when you come to these group settings is not the same person that you see on social media. How can I convince you to change? And so that really backfired on me later, where I started being like, can you just please not post anything or not add the kids? I wanted to still kind of hide. Instead of letting these people go, I still wanted to hide, because they had such great stories. stories. So ultimately, what I had to realize is that the beginning stages of my business was not about me finding other people who were broken to come and mentor. My job was to be the model for the misguided. Their job was to be people that have already recovered from those issues and that can actually go out and mentor. That was a big mistake. It got me in a lot of trouble at campuses when parents started to look up the mentors and would see that they would be drinking or smoking or out at a club. I mean, I just wasn't. I was young. I was 21, didn't know that I needed to do these things, but it was a very good lesson.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you for all this. I love your stories and examples. Let's jump to a lightning round of questions. So I'm just going to throw out some things and whatever comes to mind. Tell us where your first or the first concert that you went to.
My first concert, I was 24, late bloomer, and it was Common. It was a great concert, and I actually met him in person.
Cool. What's on your nightstand right now?
I actually don't have a nightstand in my room, which is very weird. I went through this cleaning up phase during COVID, so I have nothing in there but my bed.
Love it. The last book that you read?
I actually read the Bible every day, so that is my go-to book. I try to do daily devotionals, and it really makes my day great.
Love it. Favorite travel destination?
I don't know that I have one. I think I need to travel more, but I guess the last place that I went to was Minneapolis for a wedding, and that was really fun and cool.
Oh, that's where I'm from originally.
Yeah.
So where was your first kiss?
I was 19, late bloomer. I was a bully. I was worried about other things. I was 19, and if I remember correctly, I had this thing where I called it 2-week max, and it was after 2 weeks, and the guy told me if I didn't kiss him, that he was going to tell everyone that I was gay. So I kissed him. Yeah.
All right, last question. What's something you always keep in your purse?
I have this bag called the Miss Tremaine bag, and it has all of my essentials. I call it Miss Tremaine off of Cinderella, the evil stepmother, because I feel like when your period comes, it is evil. So all of my supplies, extra underwear, pads, panty liners, deodorant, anything you need, and I call it my little Miss Tremaine bag.
I love it. Oh, Kristen, it's just been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. And for people that want to connect with you, where can they reach you?
Yes, so on all social media platforms, my name is Kristen Geez, that's Geez. You can also go to our website if you're interested to hear more about our program, which is www.advisinggenerationz.com. And I believe those are the only places that I'm at.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.